My Life in Washington, D.C.
My name is Cliff Smith. I'm originally from Alaska. I'm 77 years old now. I went to high school over in Arlington, Virginia, went to the University of Pennsylvania, then became a diplomat for 10 years in the U.S. State Department, but I was kicked out for being against the war in Vietnam. I immediately became a radical hippie, and for a number of years working against police brutality, against the war in Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera. Then I became a Maoist, a communist organizer in Adams Morgan against the Immigration Service, working with Salvadorans and Dominicans. Then flexibility of taxi cab driving allowed me to go to demonstrations and to meetings and so on, so I became a cab driver and ended up being for 35 years. I'm still activist. I've been to 10 or 15 Black Lives Matter demonstrations in the last couple of years. I come to here to Lafayette Square every once or twice a week with my posters, and to me this is one of the centers of the earth. Every foreigner comes to the United States, they come visit DC, they come to this spot to see the White House. Every American comes to DC, they come to this spot. So I feel that this is a crossroads of the world, and that maybe my posters can have a tiny impact. I've worked for democracy my whole life on every level, extreme democracy, economically, politically, socially, and I really believe deeply in equality and deeply in what all of us human beings can achieve.
The sun is starting to set over the White House. Let's go say hi to Philipos. Philipos, they're doing the news right next to you.
Did you see this? Oh, that's Pete Whalen. Pete Whalen, he was a mentor of mine 5 years before I started working for Parks and Recreation for the city of El Segundo, California. I was only 10 years old, and we would talk about music and talk about 60s underground that later on ended up being considered part of the early influences on punk rock, stuff before Iggy and the Stooges, stuff that was from the beginning of like the MC5 time, like Chocolate Watch Band, 13th Floor Elevator, and I forget the name of all the bands, The Litter, Question Mark and the Mysterians, and some of them had some political messages, but specifically the MC5. And the MC5 are mentioned a lot by bands like Crass, because Crass was known as the more political band of the 70s from England, but they acknowledged the MC5 in 1964 already being a political influence on punk rock. And that was an influence later on bands like definitely the Iggy and the Stooges, the New York Dolls, Velvet Underground, eventually gets to the Ramones, who weren't political at all, but had a little bit of abrasive sound, like the Wayne Kramer, Freddie Smith sound, but kept it political in bands like Death that were from Detroit. The Dildos, which we weren't political, we were political minded, but started writing political lyrics toward the end of a period that we were calling ourselves Too Much Junkie Business after the Dildos. And that went into July of 1977, becoming the Anarchist and UK, which from then on where every lyric was political. But that all goes back to the MC5 and some of these, some good also folk songs that were political too. I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. I mean, Johnny Cash, that's country. And so country and folk also had their political parts. You don't need a weatherman to see which way the wind blows. Bobby Dylan goes into political rap. I mean, Public Enemy, NWA, reporting the things going on the street. No matter how gruesome they are, at least you report them. That's the beginning of before we had the World Wide Web to report what was going on in reality instead of only listening to the fluff that they put into newspapers. But punk rock had that, and pre-punk like the MC5 had that, and definitely early hip-hop had that. Megadeth, Peace Selling But Who's Buying, I think that's the name of their album. Dave Mustaine's band, who had been one of the original guitar players in Metallica. So there are some political things. Black Sabbath, War Pigs, Iron Man are political. So there's been political music running through the thread of rock and roll, and then later on hip hop from the beginning, starting with Watts Prophets in 1963. For any of you young people that think that hip hop started in Brooklyn, Watts Prophets from Watts, Los Angeles County, 1963, were putting out singles. That's the beginning of hip hop. Yes, your grandparents' era is the beginning of hip hop. Nothing to do with late 1970s or 1975 with DJ Kool Herc being an immigrant from Jamaica with 2 turntables and a mic. That's like the 3rd generation. Even in New Jersey, they already had the Last Poets, 1968. The revolution shall not be televised.
Philipos is a tourist attraction.
Not inherent. So that's just a little bit on hip hop, and the reason why hip hop can tie into rock and roll and can tie into the whole political things that happen in rock and roll. African Bambata, he sampled MC5, Kick Out the Jams, motherfuckers. So it does all mix, and it all has influences from the same thing. Hip hop uses things like Lou Reed, Walk on the Wild Side bass line. So that's also going back into punk rock. Influences of punk rock, I should say. Was part of what became a revolution, post-hippie revolution, but yes, of course, the 60s garage bands were around during the psychedelic era. Only band that showed up in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention to protest against it was the MC5. So one more time, I take it back to the MC5. Yes, the Grateful Dead were invited, all the hippie bands were invited, Carlos Santana was invited, Jimi Hendrix was invited, all of them. Invited, many of them said they'd show up, none of them did, only the MC5. So, kick out the jams, motherfuckers. I gotta stick up my ass, and I'm gonna think fast. Won't be the first, and it won't be the last. I got the world up my ass. You know I got the world up my ass. Society is building me up. Tear it down. Rip it down, rip it flat, take it ruined, spit it out. I messed up the song.
While they're doing the news right next to you, eh?
Twisted mind, twisted brain. I think they're going insane when they tell me how to act. I tell them, get back. They got the world up their ass. Fred, don't use that take.